Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in this incredible world. We appreciate you joining this call. My name's Tom Wheat, the Country Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars, and I have a colleague here and a great member of the team that also works in the UK called Gary Hibberd. What we're going to do quite simply with this webinar is it covers the topic which is displayed in front of you is how ISO 27001 helps you comply with the FTC Safeguarding Rules. So if we can just go to the next slide, that'll be grand. Just a bit of housekeeping if we can, if possible, please. You'll notice that at the minute, all attendees are muted. The reason we've done that so we get no feedback. We've got a real good open Q&A session at the end where we can simply cover any questions throughout the presentation. So you'll notice there, as you can see on the image on the right, that for any Q&As presented, please use the question tab. Once you put them in at the end, we'll pick them up, have an open dialogue. We can also unmute you also so we can speak as well as tap. Slides and recordings will be available at www.pgr.com after the presentation. So please note, if you can't make it fully, this will be recorded. It'll also be sent out by email that sits in. Any questions throughout there, obviously reach out to ourselves direct for any additional inquiries, and we'll also cover Gary's direct contacts at the end of the show. So next slide. So as mentioned, that's me on the right. My role quite simply is to look after the UK and also cover Europe in regards to any certifications required or needed for PGR that cover a wide range of standards. Therefore, specifically we're about 27,001 today, and how it links into that what sits. So without ado, this is not about me. We have a real fantastic gentleman here with an incredible background. The smile matches the face, believe me. And Gary, over to you, sir. Gary Hibberd from Co-Founder Consultants Like Us Limited.
Thank you. Yeah, as you said, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in this wonderful world. My name is Gary, and I'm a cybersecurity, data protection and privacy specialist. Been doing this for about 35 years, but essentially right now I'm the co-founder of a consultancy helping organizations with things like ISO 27001 and many other different security frameworks. And that's what brings me to speak to you today through PJR. So thank you to Tom for inviting me along to speak to your good selves about a very important topic, ISO 27001. But we're going to talk about it in context with a particular regulation. Now, we're going to talk about what that is in a second, but I would encourage you, as you listen to this presentation, is to think about this in the context of your own organization or your suppliers and the people that you interact with. It's especially important for you if you are in the United States, for the very reason that we're going to be talking about a particular regulation called the FTC Safeguard Rule. Now, the FTC Safeguard Rule, there's a number of things that you need to know about it. And again, what we will try and do throughout this presentation is give you a good sense of what it's all about, why it's relevant, and very importantly, some actions, some things you need to do. So I hope that whilst you're on this webinar, that you're not also checking your inbox, checking your emails, doing other things, because a distracted individual is someone who's really not paying attention. And let me tell you right here and right now, that's exactly what cyber criminals and scammers are hoping for. They like an audience, that is distracted, isn't paying attention. The FTC Safeguard Rule and ISO 27001 principally is here to help you gain control and be able to stop the scammers and the cyber criminals. That's what fundamentally this is all about. But of course, there's so much more to the FTC Safeguard Rules that we need to be aware of. So let's have a think about this, or let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So what is it? If you are in the United States of America, you will have heard of something called the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. That's been in place for some time. Without going too deep on this, the FTC Safeguard Rule is a rule. It's come out of the GLBA regulation, and it fundamentally focuses your attention on information security of customer information. And again, I'm saying these words very slowly and deliberately so that you're paying attention to them. It's about customer information. What the FTC Safeguard Rule is asking you to do is fundamentally three things. First of all, develop, then implement, and then maintain a comprehensive information security program. Now, you'll notice throughout this whole presentation, there are some words I'm really emphasizing because I want them to have impact on you, because words matter. Comprehensive. Well, one of the first questions you should be asking us is, what does comprehensive mean? What does that mean to you as your organization? Well, it depends upon the size and the complexity of your organization in the context of customer information. How do you do that? Well, we'll cover that throughout this presentation. But fundamentally, you need to remember that what you have to do is develop, implement, and maintain that program. Now, there's a third aspect to this that is very important. What the FTC Safeguard Rule is asking you to do is to protect customer information, and fundamentally it's about the security, the confidentiality, and the integrity of that information. Now, within the regulation, it talks very much about confidentiality, integrity, and access to customer information in actual fact. But within information security circles, anyone who's been in information security for any length of time will be very familiar with what we call the CIA triad. That's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability triangle. So that's what the FTC's Safeguard Rule is about. Hopefully you'll go out after this and you'll Google FTC Safeguard Rule and you'll get a link and you'll be able to go and read it in its entirety. It's not a ripping read like most regulations, but it's an important rule. If you're in the financial sector and you're in the United States of America, then this absolutely is something that you need to be aware of. Or if indeed you're a customer of an organization in America who's a financial sector, it's important that you are aware of this. But what does the FTC Safeguard Rule actually ask of you? Well, here's a direct quote. This is what you are required to do. You shall develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive information security program that is written in one or more readily accessible parts and contains administrative, technical, and physical safeguards that are appropriate to your size and complexity, the nature and scope of your activities, and the sensitivity of any customer information at issue. Now, of course, this session is being recorded, but were I sat in your seat right now, I would be taking a screen grab of this, take a photograph of this, because of all the regulation, of all the pages that you will read, this is principally what it all boils down to. And there's a lot of words in here. I'm going to pull a few out just again to re-emphasize the key aspects of it. And then we're going to link it to ISO 27001. Again, those words: develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive information security program. Comprehensive meaning that you have thought about every aspect of information security, which is why it goes on to say you need to think about administrative, technical, and physical safeguards or controls. So you can't just think about technology. All too often we know that people, when they're thinking about information security, their minds instantly jump to cyber security, and we're thinking about hackers and ransomware, and we're thinking about lost devices and such. Of course they are important, but the FTC Safeguard Rule is also asking you to think about the administrative controls that you need to put in place. That's controls around your suppliers. Who do you let into your organization? The people you employ. how do you know that those people are fine, upstanding individuals, just like your good selves? You need to have background checks, but they need to be commensurate or appropriate, proportional to your size and complexity. So if you're a multinational bank or a mortgage lender, it's going to look completely different to if you're a small independent financial advisor and there's just 5 of you in a team. So there is some glimmer of hope, shall we say, that the regulation, whilst it does give you some real good guidance about what it expects from you, it's not arbitrarily going to say, well, everyone has to adhere to these things. Not everybody has to have CCTV. Not everybody needs to have these other elements of controls. What you need to do is you need to think about what's appropriate to me in the context of the scope, the way that I deal with sensitive customer information. So that's what you're required to do. So what happens if it all goes wrong? Well, we all know it can go wrong. And if it goes wrong, well, unfortunately, the penalties are quite large. Just like in Europe, if there's a breach of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, then you can be found to be liable, and for every issue, every incident, then upwards of $50,000 for any incident that you have, you could be liable, held liable for that. Those legal issues, the legal action as well, doesn't stop at just purely financial imperatives as well. It could be that the FTC simply say that they're going to ask you to cease and desist certain activities. So they may say, look, we're not going to fine you, but you can't do this with customer information any longer because, quite frankly, you can't be trusted. That's not a great place to be if you're in the financial sector, and you need to be able to trade and use people's personal information. We also know that, of course, litigation is a real risk for organizations and for individuals, especially in the United States, where if you are found to have breached someone's personal rights in terms of their personal data, then they themselves could call for compensation for damages and distress. And remembering that all of these lead to a very significant issue, which is, of course, reputational damage. So here's a question for you, not for you to answer out loud, I guess, but it's a question for us all to ponder. What price would you place on your reputation? How valuable is your reputation? How long has it taken you as an organization or as an individual to build your reputation? Are you likely to get new clients if your name is associated to a major breach of customer information? Well, the likelihood is it's not. How valuable is your business once your reputation has been tarnished significantly? So there's clearly a lot in there. So here's your to-do list. I don't want this to all be doom and gloom and say that there's nothing you can do, because clearly there is. There is a way through the FTC Safeguard Rule. So here is your to-do list. And very quickly, we're going to go through this. And these are things that are required by the regulation, the Safeguards Rule. Number one, you need to appoint a qualified individual. What a qualified individual is, well, that's the subject of a whole other recording and podcast, and something we no doubt we'll discuss in later episodes. But essentially, just like any major project or significant project of significant importance, you need to identify someone in your organization who is qualified to lead on this. Now, my suggestion on this, just very briefly, is that it's somebody who has a good understanding around risk management, a good understanding of information security in its broadest sense. So understanding physical security, technical security controls, people controls, maybe a governance, risk and compliance type person, but that qualified individual will be someone who will have to report to board on how progress is being made on this particular project. What you also need to do is conduct a risk assessment. Now, that risk assessment, of course, is the part where you actually find out, well, these are the things that, the areas that were most at risk. These are the vulnerabilities. So it might be that you have lots of technical risks and vulnerabilities in your organization. Maybe you don't have a virtual private network of VPNs, you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled, you don't have firewalls that are being checked or being patched on a regular basis. Until you ask, until you check, how do you know? Now, risk assessments, risk itself is it's a profession. It's a fascinating topic. We're all risk managers, every single one of us, every person on this call here right now, on this video, everyone watching, we're all risk managers to some extent. When you cross the road, when you drive your car, when you go out at night, into the darkness, you're measuring risk, you're analyzing risk. Where am I vulnerable? Where are my threats coming from? You can't protect what you don't understand. It's a phrase I say quite often to people. You need to understand where you are most at risk. And the only way you can do that is by asking your organization, where do we think we might be at risk? What could put our business at risk of fines or our reputational damage, or at risk of losing customer information? Once you've done this, you then need to design and implement your safeguards, i.e. you need to identify what controls are you going to put in place to mitigate those particular risks. Just in the same way that when you get in your car, you make sure when you set off, you put your seatbelt on, you're at a risk of having a car accident. We all are. The moment we get in a vehicle, you're at risk. But the car manufacturers have done their best to minimize the impact on you, but you've got to play your part. You've got to put your seatbelt on to protect yourself. So you need to design and implement safeguards that are appropriate to you. Again, what I said earlier, it doesn't necessarily follow that everybody has to have CCTV installed, that everybody's got fire alarms, that everybody has network intrusion detection systems. Malware protection, you would almost say, is a prerequisite of most organizations. What form that looks like is down to you. What level of training you decide to give to your staff is going to differ if you've got 5 people in your organization compared to 500 people in your organization. So you need to design and implement those safeguards. Once you've implemented those safeguards, of course, you need to monitor them and test them. Are they effective? Are they doing their job? I remember going to a conference and speaking once, and a CTO in the audience said to me, Gary, I'm spending $5 million a year on IT security. 1, how can I save money? And 2, is there a better place to spend that money? My first question to her was, have you conducted a risk assessment? Do you know where your threats and vulnerabilities are? And she said, no. I said, well, in that case, my second answer to both questions is stop spending your money and let's find out, see what happens. Because you might be spending your 5 million over here on your technical controls, but you're losing data over here because you haven't trained people, because you're not managing your suppliers, and the suppliers are actually the gateway into your organization. How are you going to know if you don't monitor those controls that you've put in place? Security is not a fire and forget thing. Remember, develop, implement, and maintain your security program. Also on your to-do list is you must implement policies and procedures, because this is very much linked to those safeguards. If you think of policies and procedures as those boring documents that no one ever reads, if that's true of your organization, and I want you to think about your organization. When did you last read your policies? Be honest, how good are your policies? Are your policies a mixture of policy and procedure? A policy is setting out what you expect. A procedure is telling people how they need to implement that policy. So they are two separate things. If you're reading your document and it starts to stray into your policies and they start to stray into, well, we expect everyone to use the internet and email for business purposes only, and then you start to stray into, and how you do that is and you start explaining, well, you've mixed the two up. So you need to implement or write good policies and good procedures. So go back to your own documents and ask yourself, how effective are these? And if you simply say, well, we've got policies and procedures and we expect everyone to read them and understand them, again, I'm going to ask you and I'm going to challenge you on that. And I'm going to say to you, if you're using any kind of software, all of those pieces of software would have asked you to agree to the terms and conditions of that policy or of that software, the use of that software. How many of you read and truly understood those terms and conditions? You need to make sure that your policies are read and understood, and that's why it's important that you have those in place. Now, the FTC Safeguard Rules does expect you to have something called an incident response plan. So again, I'm going to ask you to think about, if today there was a ransomware attack and you received an email from a hacker who said, we've got all your customer information, we've got all your employee information, including yours. We know your social security number, we know your national insurance number, we know your bank details, we know your date of birth, we know your address, we have all your details of your next of kin, your nearest and dearest. Would you know what to do? Would your board of directors know what to do? If they don't, well, you need to look at your incident response plan. Now, I hope you have an incident response plan documented. But again, is this just one of those things that you've written and you put on a shelf somewhere? I often say to people that having an incident response planning and knowing what to do with it are two very different things. Now, if you can go back to your incident response plan, you can say, hand on heart, I think we could follow this in a crisis and a disaster, then great. And that's absolutely where you need to be. And if you're not sure, or if you're thinking, well, I need to get some support at the board here, well, maybe put that question to them. Would we know today, if we had a major breach, what our response would be? Would we be able to manage through it? And the final thing you need to do, I've gone back to this very first point again, is that qualified individual needs to report all of your current status, all of those things that I've just asked you to put on your to-do list, and report that status back to the board. Where are we with our risk assessments? Have we got appropriate safeguards in place? Yes or no? Do we monitor and test them? Have we got policies and procedures that people will read and do read? And do we have an incident response plan that we can trust? That's what you need to be looking to do. Now, what I really want to give you is, because there's a lot here, I want to give you a roadmap and a solution to this. And it is through the lens of ISO 27001. ISO 27001 is an information security management system that provides a framework for managing sensitive company information to ensure it remains secure. I often say to people that an ISO 27001 is a framework. It's like a recipe. There is so much to information security and data protection and privacy. There are so many risks out there. If you're an organization that has 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or 100 laptops and devices, all people working from home or from office or from different jurisdictions. It is a complex thing. But ISO 27001 is a risk-based management system that allows you to add some level of control within your organization so that you actually can gain control of all of those risks and all of those things you need to do. Fundamentally, what it looks to do is it asks you to consider the risks associated and the controls associated to people, premises, processors, PCs, and providers. All P's, makes it nice and easy for us all to remember. But what are your people controls? How are you onboarding new people into your organization? Do you have policies in place? Do you have physical controls? If you have physical location, then do you need to consider what those physical controls might be? It might be the CCTV, it might be locks on the front door, alarm codes, those kinds of things. But it's also physical media as well. So the storage of physical hardware that you have in your offices or your premises. And remember, although we might be talking about premises here, as in you might be thinking, well, I don't have offices, I have home, people work from home. Well, what about them? What are they doing about protecting that customer information? Are they allowing their laptop, their work laptop, to be used by their children? Well, there's a question for you to answer. You need processors like the incident response process, but you need processors as well for upgrading and updating your technology. The PCs, so again, the PCs, ISO 27001 gives you a set of controls for you to consider, do I need to put these controls in place for my organization and for the systems that I use? And then finally, providers, the people that you rely upon to provide the services for your you and your organization. So again, I'm a real fan of giving you something practical, something that you can take away. So what I would like to give you here is your to-do list. Again, very much similar to what we just talked about here. What I would suggest that you do, and this will build up, and at the end of it, I will tell you there's one final slide after this, and then we're done, and it's over to you for your questions. So I hope you've got lots of questions, either about the FTC Safeguards Rule or about ISO 27001. So number one, conduct a gap analysis. You can't protect what you don't understand. Where are you against the controls that are required? In ISO 27001, there are 93 controls within what's called the Annex A of that standard. Buy the standard. So maybe step one is buy the standard, read the standard, conduct a gap analysis of both FTC Safeguard Rule and ISO 27001. And who cares at this point in time how ugly that looks? If it's a big red thing that looks very ugly and very sore and looks like, wow, we've got a lot of work. Good, because you can say, this is our baseline, this is where we start, but this is where we're going to end up. And that's your gap. At least you can begin to close that gap. That's where you need to be. Once you've done your gap analysis, you conduct your risk assessment. And with that risk assessment, you'll start to understand where your risks are, of course, but a risk is essentially two things. It's your threat and your vulnerability. So where are we vulnerable and why are we vulnerable? So just simply saying hackers, that's not really a risk because it's a threat. That's all it is. It's no vulnerability. So you need to say we are at risk from hackers because. So if someone says to me, yeah, a risk is flooding, I'll say, are you near a river? No, but it's a real risk. Is it for you? Well, risk of flooding because our servers are in the basement and we are next to a river. Yes, you are. That is a real risk. Fantastic. Let's move on and let's start to think about developing an action plan. Because once you've identified your risk, once you understand where you could potentially have a problem, Well, you've got an action plan. All that big red ugliness that is all those big glaring things you need to fix. Well, guess who's going to have to do that? You're going to have to appoint that qualified individual to help you fix this. And then you develop the written information security program. So once you've done these first 4 things, you can then start to say, right, how are we going to address them? What do we need? What policies do we need? What procedures do we need? Do we need an incident response plan? That kind of thing. This all becomes what's known, certainly within the FTC Safeguard Rule world, as a WISP. Now, a WISP is a written information security program, not a plan, not a project which has a definitive end. It's a program. It's an ongoing thing. It's not a fire and forget. Remember that. Then once you've got that in place, you audit your controls to measure, to monitor and measure them. And then you train your staff to understand what it is that you expect of them. And that includes your incident response team. I cannot tell you how many times I've read an incident response team plan that says, these are our incident responders, and they've got 8 people or 7 people or 3 people. And I said, they're fantastic. Can I speak to those 3 people? I speak to those 3 people, and guess what? They had no idea they were listed in an incident response plan. You need to talk to your team, train them. This is what we require in the event of an incident. This is what we require of you as the members of staff. If something bad happens, if there is a breach, if there is something that happens on your machine that is unexpected, this is what you need to do. You need to train your staff. And you also need to engage with service providers. And this is the last one I'm going to place on this screen here, that engaging with your service providers. The service providers are often your weakest link. I know there's a saying within information security that people are your weakest link. That is not true at all. In actual fact, with the greatest of respect, it's suppliers, because these are people that you trust to come into your organization. Sometimes you give them access into your buildings, the cleaners, the person who comes in to water the plants, the IT team that come in, the maintenance person, whatever it might be. Service providers, what does it say in your contract about their duty around accessing of customer information? This is your to-do list. So take again a quick screen grab of this, and if I'm on it, I'll just pause for a second. So there you are. That's your engage with service providers. There is one final thing that I would always say in closing, and that is that you need to put security on the agenda before it becomes the agenda. I promise you, I have worked in this industry for a very long time. I know it may not look it, but it's true. And I have gone to organizations where they've had a data breach. They haven't thought about security. And it occupies their every waking moment for days, weeks, and months. It distracts them. And in some particular cases, it destroys them. So put security on the agenda before it becomes the agenda. That's my final takeaway from this session. And I would just say thank you again to PJR and to Tom for inviting me along. My contact details are there, the website. Please do contact us if you have any questions. And there you are. Questions over to you guys.
Gary, just brilliant. Thank you, chap. I definitely took that pose, mate. It's there. I took the screenshot. It looked incredible. It's been banked to say the least.
I did not practice that bit. I thought, oh, okay, I'm not sure.
Well, I disagree. I think that was a natural, chap. It looked good from our end. But no, on a serious note, I appreciate the informal insight, what you recapped. And I think it's really key. It's a case of, you know, with PGR being a global organization that sits there, we've had many clients who ring up in regards to the FTC Safeguarding Rules. And I think what I want to share before we just come to questions, by all means, and please, folks, if you just use the panel on the right-hand side, I can ask any questions that you want to ask to Gary direct or to myself, is the feedback we've had is overwhelming, because sometimes FTC Safeguarding Rules is in a position whereby, okay, where do we start? We've got to comply to them. But I think what people forget here is not only they're complying to the route of 27001, but they're also picking up an amazing accreditation. that sits alongside that they never sort of set out to do, and the added value it has to the organisation that sits in there, and also their supply chain. So for me, from our customers, overwhelmingly is a case of is that's what they say straight away, that it's helped us massively as a solid foundation to build off these safeguarding rules. And by the way, thank you for also an incredible accreditation that's also not just aided but grown the business as well. So what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Tom. And I think this is something that I'm going to go back to that slide that I mentioned earlier about what price, what value would you place on your reputation. With the greatest respect to anyone and everyone who's on here, is that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're going to say you are the best at that, okay? So, but how do you demonstrate that in this modern day and age? How do you demonstrate that you are indeed better than your competitor? Quite often it's if you went to the doctor, I'm a real fan of analogies, as you probably picked up. If you go to the doctor and the doctor said, I will make you well, you kind of say, well, that's what I expect of you. If you go to your accountants and they say, I'm going to do your books really well and I'm going to save you some money, it's like, well, that's why I've come here. That's what I expect. My question is how can I trust you? I want to know that I can trust you with my personal data. And ISO 27001 is a certificate of trust. It's a outward evidence demonstrating that you can be trusted because it's being assessed by external certification bodies like PJR. You come in and you say, right, we're going to check that you have got all these controls and that you are doing the right things.
Brilliant. And I think maybe for some of the audience who are coming on FTC Safeguard in regards to 27, a very common question that will always get asked, most definitely for people who are mostly observing this or part of the board, is how long does it take to get this in place?
How long does it take to get 27001 in place?
Yeah, it's a common question because if I think what we can both agree on here is a case of is regards to the FTC safeguarding rules that naturally this, it's not a problem. It's all about a solution. ISO 27001 is most definitely a solution to assist and catapult this.
Yeah.
Therefore, as with anything in life and organisation now and everyone busy, a common question from many boards that we constantly get to case of is, well, how long will it take, for example, to get ISO 27001 in place?
It's a great, and again, I'm going to use an analogy in a second or two, but to answer the question very pointedly, notwithstanding bringing in this body because your availability is limited as well, we typically say to organisations, it'll take you between 3 and 6 months to get to a point where you can go to PJR and say, right, we want you to come in and do your stage 1 and stage 2 audit. Now, we would actually say your stage 1 audit is around about the third month mark, going from a standing position of doing nothing, having nothing in place, because that is sometimes the best way. Because if you've got nothing, you've got a blank sheet and you can start and you can build from there. And then stage 2 would be around about the 6 month mark. So 3 to 6 months, I would suggest. But, and this is the analogy that I'm going to give, is I often say to people, well, you've got to remember that ISO 27001 FTC Safeguard Rule is asking you to develop, implement, and maintain an information security program. So it's an ongoing thing. It's about continual improvement. So it's like me coming to you and saying, Tom, you're my physical trainer. How long is it going to take you to make me healthy? You're going to be like, well, it depends how much work you're going to put in. But it'll take me about 3 months to get you to a position where you're actually a lot healthier than where you are right now.
Yeah.
But then we'll maintain that health and we'll improve it over time. So it'll be an ongoing process. So once you get your stage 2 in place, then it's an ongoing continual improvement process because you're monitoring it, you're testing it, and it's an ongoing process. So I always liken it to health, your health and well-being to information security program. It's not a line in the sand where I can just cross over and go, I am now healthy or I am now secure. It's an ongoing assessment.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's important for everyone to know is, you're right, that our timescales align because ultimately, until PJR come to do their bit, we have to have 3 months of evidence. Yeah. And a common question for us is, what is 3 months of evidence? And I suppose, The minute you put a date or time on going to an information security policy, the clock starts to tick.
Yeah.
And it's very much a common question of where we go and what we do. And for them and the audience who maybe haven't got ISO 27001 in regards to terminology really short, what's stage 1 and stage 2? Stage 1's a documentation review, and stage 2 is a more in-depth check of going, okay, you've talked, do you actually walk it? So that's the difference too, as a quick analogy for the room. And I think you're right, Gary. I think anything regarding our industry, from the FTC Safeguarding Rules or the ISO 27001, is, I suppose, an assumption in life that once you've got the certificate, you think you're done, whereas in fact you've just started.
Yeah.
And what we do know, the key part of ISO, that continual improvement of driving forward change and positivity, is about every year we come back in to basically check on that sits, and you continually improve it. Key part of the sub-core standards that we know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to, on this particular point, and then I know we've got a couple of questions, so we'll go to that. But on that point, I always say to people, stage 1 is, imagine you're going to go up to the top of the highest mountain that you can think of. So in Europe, we might think of Mount Everest, but wherever you are in the world, whatever the highest mountain you can imagine, your stage 1 is like PJR are going to come along and just check your equipment and make sure that you've got all the things you need. That means you're not going to kill yourself as you try and ascend that big mountain. Now, your stage 2 is the bit where you're at the top of the mountain and you've got there, and Tom and PJR are just checking that you didn't cheat, and that you didn't get a helicopter up here, and that you actually did walk the walk and you talk the talk, and that you've got the evidence to show, and you've got the bruises and you've got the scars to demonstrate you did do that journey. So that's the difference. Your stage 1 is very much about checking your equipment, making sure you're ready for it, and your stage 2 is you stood on that top of that mountain, and hopefully at that point Tom will shake your hand and give you your flag or your certificate. So there you are.
So, Gary, a couple of questions, if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, go for it.
We're just going to go through these pretty quick in the next couple of minutes. Folks, if there's any more questions, please ask. It's very informal. We want to get to what you want to get answered. First question from Joseph, Gary. What competencies should we be looking for when appointing a qualified individual?
It's a great question. You're looking for a well-rounded individual who understands information security. And I'm purposely saying information security here, not just cyber security, because I think this is linked to another question that's being asked. All too often, we focus purely on the technology side of it when it comes to security. That's cyber security. Information security encompasses all the things that I've talked about. It understands that person will have a background in risk, compliance. They'll understand the legalities, the kind of qualities and qualifications we might be looking for is, yes, somebody with some level of technical skill, but also data protection, understanding of laws and regulations like the FTC Safeguard Rule, but also laws that are part of your industry. In particular, in the FTC Safeguard Rules, obviously that's a financial sector, but whatever industry you're coming from. So, but the qualified individual needs to have good risk understanding, governance, the legalities, and technical controls as well. And be a good program manager, someone who understands how to run a program of change, so change management as well. So there's a lot of, it's quite an interesting role. Yeah.
Cheers for that, Gary. Next question from Hamid. What kind of qualifications do you need to take to the ISO 27001, and do you need an IT expert?
Right, okay. Again, I'm going to refer almost back to the previous one. You don't need to be a IT expert. Of the 93 controls in ISO 27001, only 34 of them are technical controls. Now, there are some crossovers. So in the organizational controls, of which there are 37, there are controls regarding access control. But the reason why that doesn't sit within IT controls is because access is also access to your building. How do you control access to your your sites. If you're in a gated area, do you have a 6-foot wall around your building? What is it? So there are technical controls within ISO 27001, but you do not need to be a technical expert. When I'm looking for hiring consultants like us who focus on ISO 27001, we pull them from different pools. So people, again, who are risk specialists, data protection specialists, or auditors, so they might have audited another ISO framework. So we'll bring in those kind of individuals. So someone who can demonstrate that they understand the broader aspects of information security. So no specific qualifications. I'm looking for values and experience.
Cheers, Gary. Perfect. I'm going to answer your question, sir. Adam. So Adam's question is, so if we don't have ISO 27001 already, is the first step to buy it from the ISO website, read it and figure it out? Where do we stand and where do we need to be?
Yes.
Pose, Gary.
Yeah, I know that sounds like such a flippant answer, but no, fantastic, Adam, absolutely. Your first step, people say to me, I'm really confused by ISO 27001, or I'm really confused about GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And I always say, well, have you read it? And they'll go, no, I'm really confused by Harry Potter because I've never read it. You're going to be confused. Read it and understand it, and through that, you can then start to say, right, I understand what ISO 27001 is asking of me. And now what I can do is I can start to build that gap analysis. So when it says, as we all know within the industry, you build what's called a statement of applicability. So you look at the 93 controls and you'll say, is that first question to answer is that control applicable to me? Do I need to think about that? If you don't, for instance, there are about, I'm going to get this number wrong, but it's about 5 or 6 controls all to do with software development. Now, if you don't do software development, that's 6, 7 controls that you can simply say, that's not applicable to me because we don't do any development in our organization. So that's great. So you can say not applicable, not applicable, not applicable. But then where there are controls, where it says things like your organization shall implement policies that have been signed off and communicated and acknowledged by your staff, you could say, well, we've got policies, but they haven't been communicated. So it's there, but I'm not 100% confident. So you might want to give yourself a 70 out of 100 score. So that's the gap analysis work is what we do. We go into organizations and do that gap analysis for them. But that's not to say that you can't do that yourself. But it's essentially, you can't protect what you don't understand. So as Adam said, is figure out where we stand today, and then where do you need to be? What's the ideal, given the size and complexity commensurate to your organization and the scope that you define?
Beautiful, Gary, as always. And as I said, I'm open answering your question. I suppose this leads on really just to sort of close this out, because there isn't any more questions in the group. Is the note for the diary, folks, is February the 25th. And the reason why February the 25th, Gary's going to cover the top 10 mistakes when implementing ISO 27001. So I think that comes hand in hand, Adam, as a case of, okay, where to start, what's the first hurdle and where to go about. But it sounds crazy, but yeah, get the standard. And then there's many resources in regards to Gary that can help and implement and do that sort of. The analogy of ISO in the world that isn't in it, I use is the matrix. So imagine all them numbers and letters coming down the screen. And it's Gary who takes them numbers, letters, the screens into the Queen's English, shall we say, and makes it work, makes it make sense. So yeah, just to recap on that one, February the 25th, top 10 mistakes when implementing ISO 27001. Back with Gary. And it's really insightful, and it's insightful for not people who are just implementing it, but more importantly, the people who have, shall we say, because that's where we come in regards to trends, tweaks within the norms, and that's what's in there. But Gary, brilliant. I appreciate everyone who's asked questions. We hope it did answer your questions. It was very informal. Gary's details are there. Use the resource. This man is an encyclopedia, incredible at what he does. And as I said, by all means, if you don't believe it, get yourself on LinkedIn and you'll see the following this chap has got. As for certification side, obviously we're here, we work hand in hand in the case of to basically do what we can for you. But Gary, any final words, sir?
All I would say, again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier, which is don't leave it until tomorrow. Put security on the agenda before it becomes the agenda.
And on that note, Shell's incredible. And just so you know, folks, this doesn't need to be a memory test. We're going to upload this onto the website. It will also be directed, email direct to you. So you've got a copy, not just for you, for your team, and for them as your cousins attend. So Gary, final post, sir. And yeah, we'll see you soon. And you take care, folks, wherever you're in the world. Have an incredible day and all the best. You take care. Goodbye.
Thanks ever so much, everyone. All the best.
Goodbye.
Bye.